We've worked together on putting this book together, and of course it deals with some of the difficulties that an adopted child and my specific difficulties might have happened to them, but it isn't. It's a story that I think is rich, and that's how I wanted it to come across, not as an "oh, poor me."
No,
because I don't feel poor me.
No. What it feels like to me is this sort of cornucopia of ways of thinking about identity in relation to family.
Yes.
Whoever that identity is, whoever that family is.
It is about, I guess it is about the emergence of identity and how identity is and isn't related to your original roots.
And it's something that adopted people are forced to think about in the way that the rest of us don't necessarily, although of course as soon as you start questioning your sexuality it comes front and centre.
Well, yes. Yes.
And maybe that's why it's so recognisable.
Yes. Do you know what I'd like to do, since you're talking about identity and sexuality, and that's read a love poem. It isn't in the book.
That's okay. I think we can allow one that isn't.
Okay. I think we should.
I think we should.
If we're talking about identity.
Yeah.
Heavy water. If in your gentleness you sometimes forget that love is not the only truth we know, then I'll remind you. You taught me first our histories, like heavy water in our veins, can't be denied. To live after them, as if an empty page or a clear stretch of stream were open, is not in nature. We have to bear them, written in our blood. I see you watch me read, and in your deep kindness long to wipe the page. You won't. You are looking for something longer than love, and braver than kindness. When I was almost 60, I went to Amsterdam and subsequently married a Dutch woman. And her family, it seemed to me, were very kind of ordinary, not in a boring way, but they approximated to what I thought perhaps a family might look like. And for the first time, perhaps because I was living in a different country and trying to learn to speak a different language, and was marrying someone who was from a different tradition, with a different kind of history, I started to think about my own roots. I think I'd almost taken a pride before then in not bothering. You know, I'm who I am, and that's
fine as I am, thank you.
That's fine, yes. And I went to NORCAP, which is a wonderful organisation which helps adopted children do the necessary research to find their parents, if they're around, or their history or whatever. And I was pretty certain by then that my mother, of course, would be dead. And to my shock, horror, consternation, surprise and delight, at 86 years old, she was still alive. And she told me in her first letter, which was very well written, rather distant, that she was beating her new word processor into submission. Ah, I thought, that's where I get it from. Yeah. And we exchanged 3 or 4 letters before she died. And then I felt free to explore the possibility of finding the brother that I knew now, that I'd got. And I did find him, and he's lovely. We don't have very much in common, except I've discovered we both love Grace and Perry, which is kind of astonishing. He loves aeroplanes, I'm a poet, but there you go. We appreciate each other, and his family, his wife and his daughter and 2 sons and their children have been totally accepting and warm towards Tony and myself. So that was a great gain. To find that there was somebody still alive in the world that I was actually connected to by blood, as well as, not that blood's all that mystical, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And he too was a knee trembler. You know, our mother wasn't married then either.
Right.
She'd been married. She married the man who my brother's has his name, but he died a year later. She married on the eve of the Second World War, and he died at Dunkirk. Well, there I was sitting in English class in my first year at the grammar school at the convent, and we had a terrifying English teacher. She had, well, you're not supposed to say this anymore, she had a very large bosom. She carried all before her, and she had a mane of white hair. And she used to frighten the bejesus out of us. And she made us write a poem. And I wrote a poem, it was only 4 lines long. And she said to me, "Kathleen Foley, do you realise this is poetry?" And I never looked back. But I have always, as a constant thread through my life, written poetry. But of course, well, don't know why I say of course, but it feels like of course to me. I never expected to be published. I never tried to be published. I just wrote. And of course I read poetry too. So that was the beginning.
So what
the convent school did that much for me.
Yeah. So what kick-started you into putting things forward for publication?
A friend that I met in London was working for the Socialist Commentary, and the poetry editor at that time was Sean Day-Lewis. And she said, "Send something in." So I did. I sent 3 poems in, and I think all 3 were published, and I had a letter back saying, "This is excellent." But then I didn't do anything more for years. another 10 years at least. Yes, the first day job I had, I was at the public library, and you will not be astonished to learn that they very quickly got rid of me because I kept muddling up the, what's it called, that system?
The Dewey system.
That's right. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do numbers. Anyway, and that was around about the point where I was really rather ill, and also I just failed most of my GCSEs through being rather ill and also not ever doing any work and playing quite a lot of truants. So, yeah. And my mother at that point, God bless her, went up to school to Mother Walsingham, and she said, "Take her back." So I went back to school for 3 months, and I worked hard. I don't know how I did it, and I passed all my GCSEs. So then I went to Westminster County Council as a filing clerk. And the very first day I went to work, the whole office went for a mass x-ray. Bingo bango, that was it. That was 3 weeks later I was in hospital. And when I came out of hospital...
Good for Westminster County Council.
Yeah, much later. I mean, I was in hospital 8 months and on bed rest for a year. And then gradually up in increments, I started nursing. I do not know to this day how they accepted me, because I still had a collapsed lung and I used to have refills every week. There's a procedure they called artificial pneumothorax, and it felt as if you had a paper bag crackling in your chest.
Lovely.
But anyway, I did. I qualified as a nurse and subsequently as a midwife. And without really understanding or exploring the whys and wherefores, I fell passionately in love with midwifery. You can imagine, can't you?
Mm.
Babies and mothers, mothers and babies. But I wasn't terribly strong and fit, and I had to go back from being a district midwife, which I loved, but where you sometimes in those days worked up to 72 hours a week.
And all times of the
hospital,
day and random,
yeah,
and
that's right.
travelling and...
And a hospital was like a sausage factory after being on the district. So I went and did teacher training, because I thought it was time I was going to be educated, and I didn't realise that you don't get much of an education at teacher training college. But anyway, I did. I went, I qualified as a teacher, I taught for a little while, I went into hospital with arthritis, I was off for a long time, and when I was recovering I went to evening classes in archaeology. This was an old passion of mine, not that I ever done anything or knew anything about it, but when I was knee-high to a grasshopper I used to read Greek myths and prehistory and that kind of thing. And I went to archaeology classes and I said, did you think I could be an archaeologist? Don't be ridiculous, she said. How do you think you'd get down in a trench? I tell you what, she said, you could do conservation. So I went for an interview at London University, Institute of Archaeology, and I was interviewed by two very odd customers, well known to the conservation world, absolute eccentrics. Lovely people, Miss Geddy and Henry Hodges, yes. And they said, well, what grounds do you have for thinking that you might be good at conservation? Have you any hobbies? Do you knit or sew? No, I don't do anything. Well, how can we then assess whether or not... Oh, I said, well, when I was a nurse, people used to queue up for me to take their stitches out. All right, they said. So I was in.
Yep, I can see the connections.
And when I qualified, I went to Lincoln Archaeological Trust and set up a laboratory for them. And I worked there for quite a long time, and it was lovely working in the field and training up students. And then I moved to the art college and became head of their new conservation department. Then I was headhunted to go to English Heritage, and after I'd been there for a little while as head of the conservation, archaeological conservation team, I was appointed head of the laboratory. So there were a whole bunch of research scientists, human bone, animal bone, pollen, you name it, working in the field of scientific approaches to archaeology. And I loved it. So after I retired, and I retired early because by then I was beginning to get this nagging feeling that if I didn't start writing seriously, I never would. I went back and taught almost immediately at university again for a little while. I went to Washington for a conference, as one does, and met Tommy, to whom I am now married. there are real aspects of Dutch culture which march alongside that bit of English culture that I'm used to.
Mm.
I mean, when I was a child, periodically those bits of the family that were in London would come to our house. Well, we didn't have a house, we had 2 rooms, but anyway. And my father would get the beer out and his mouth organ and his Jew's harp out, and we would sing. The Amsterdam songs are so like Cockney songs, in spirit,
Yes.
not precisely in content, but when I first heard people singing Amsterdam songs, I thought, oh, I recognise that, you know, that's part of my past too. But I mean, the Dutch are both, I think, I mean, you can't generalise, how can you generalise about a whole country, but tolerant, passionately keen on the arts, blunt and sometimes bloody minded, hilarious on bicycles and lethal. And it is, if you're going to be anywhere in Europe, I think it's the country that probably most understands England and the English, and conversely, I think. I think that there is a genuine rapport. Perhaps that's just because I have a rapport with my wife, but I don't think so.